The question changed everything. It was subtle at first, barely detectable within the collector network. But every advanced civilization watching understood the same thing immediately. The collectors had never formed a question before. Not in recorded history. Not in observed behavior. Not in simulations. They processed. They corrected. They consumed. They stabilized. But they did not ask. Now, something inside their system had produced uncertainty so persistent it transformed into inquiry. On Earth, the battlefield did not celebrate. No one cheered. Because experienced soldiers know something simple. When the enemy starts learning in real time, the war is not over. It is changing shape. The Eltharies stared at their instruments in silence. "This is unprecedented," one finally said. A human scientist responded without looking up. "Yeah," he muttered. "We get that a lot." Across System Viral, the collector node paused its expansion completely. Then, for the first time, it transmitted a structured signal that did not attempt to overwrite reality. It attempted to understand it. Human systems intercepted it instantly. Linguists scrambled. AI systems overloaded. Mathematical models failed and restarted. Finally, a translation emerged. It was incomplete, fragmented, but recognizable. Why does change persist without collapse? The question spread across every allied system like shockwaves. Even the Elthari went still. A human officer whispered, "They're asking why we exist." The answer from Earth was not a single voice. It was many, too many to count. But one message was broadcast back into the collector network. Because collapse is not the only outcome. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then the collector structure reacted. Not violently. Not defensively. Curiously, entire sections of their formation paused to process the concept. Not the only outcome. That idea alone caused instability. Because the collectors had always assumed all systems converged to one final state. Stability. Consumption. Completion. But humanity was presenting a contradiction. A system that never settled. Across human fleets, commanders noticed something terrifying and hopeful at the same time. The collectors were slowing. Not because they were losing strength, but because they were reconsidering their purpose. The Elthari finally spoke. "If they understand you," a human admiral finished it, "then they stop being what they were." A long silence followed. Then alarms flared. Not from attack. From internal collector restructuring. Entire segments of their front line began disconnecting from the main structure. Not destroyed. Not repelled. Detached. Observers panicked. "What is happening?" one council envoy demanded. A human engineer stared at the data. "They're splitting," he said slowly. "Like they're unsure what they are anymore." The collector question repeated again. This time stronger. More stable. "What is the purpose of change that does not resolve?" Humanity answered again. Not with force. Not with weapons. But with experience. Images transmitted across the network. A child learning. A civilization rebuilding after war. A broken world healing. Two enemies shaking hands after peace. A species constantly improving, never finished. The response was simple. The purpose is continuation. That word hit the collector structure like a foreign element. Continuation. Not end state. Not completion. Just ongoing existence. For the first time, the collectors did not advance. They did not correct. They did not consume. They observed. And, in that observation, the war changed into something no one had predicted. Not conquest. Not destruction. But transformation. The Elthari finally said what every civilization was thinking. You did not defeat them. A pause. You rewrote what they think they are. Across the stars, the collector front began to dissolve. Not in collapse, but in reorganization. Smaller clusters forming. Independent units stabilizing differently. Some drifting away entirely. No longer one unstoppable entity, but something new, uncertain, learning. And Earth, watching it all unfold, had only one reaction. A tired human commander leaned back and said, "So we started a philosophy war instead of a space war." A pause. Then she added, I need a vacation. The phrase, I need a vacation, became unexpectedly famous across half the galaxy. Not because it was strategic, but because it perfectly summarized humanity's attitude toward reality-shattering events. Meanwhile, the collectors did not disappear. They evolved into something no one had a name for yet. No longer a single expanding front, they reorganized into drifting clusters, each one experimenting with continuation in different ways. Some clusters still tried to consume. Some tried to observe. Some simply stopped moving and began studying surrounding space like curious children. The galaxy had never seen a force lose its singular identity and remain operational. It should have been catastrophic. Instead, it was unstable peace. The Elthari called it what it was. A transition species event. Humanity called it something simpler. They're thinking too much now. On Earth, the aftermath of the war looked almost ordinary again. Cities rebuilt faster than expected. Colonies expanded further than ever. Former wartime industries shifted into exploration and trade. But something had changed in human psychology. People didn't forget the war. They integrated it. Old military doctrines were rewritten. New academic fields emerged: adaptive conflict theory, unpredictable system strategy, nonlinear survival modeling. And one phrase kept appearing in every study: humans win when systems fail to stabilize. That line alone became the subject of debates across the galaxy, because it implied something dangerous: that humanity did not rely on order. It thrived in the gap between orders. One day, the Elthari returned to Earth alone. No fleet, no escort, just a single vessel. They requested a private audience. The meeting was held in a quiet orbital station above Earth. No generals this time. No emergency protocols. Just representatives. The Elthari spoke first. The collectors are no longer a unified threat. A human diplomat nodded. We noticed. A pause. They will not invade again as before, the Elthari continued. But they will continue evolving. The human leaned forward slightly. Into what? The Elthari hesitated. That is why we came. They projected a new set of readings. The collector clusters were now communicating internally, not as commands, but as shared uncertainty. Questions were spreading between clusters faster than expansion orders ever had. One dominant question had formed across them all. What should we become? The room went silent. A scientist whispered, "That's not a war anymore." The Elthari agreed. "No. It is identity formation." Then they added something heavier. "And you are the catalyst." Humanity did not respond immediately, because this was no longer about survival. It was about responsibility. A human representative finally spoke. "So, what happens if they decide wrong?" The Elthari looked toward Earth. "Then you will face them again." A pause. "Not as enemies. As results." That sentence settled over the room like gravity. Across the galaxy, old empires watched closely. Because for the first time in recorded history, a species had not been conquered, not been destroyed, not been assimilated, but had changed the nature of what it faced. And humanity? Humanity simply kept doing what it always did. Arguing, improving, expanding, adapting. One engineer summarized it best while repairing a damaged orbital station. "We didn't win because we were perfect." He tightened a bolt. "We won because we refused to stay the same." Far beyond the stars, the collector clusters continued to drift. Still uncertain, still learning, still asking questions no one in the galaxy had answers for yet. And somewhere in that uncertainty, a new possibility began to form. Not war, not peace, but something far more unstable. Understanding. Deep space remained unusually quiet after that. Not empty, never empty, but uncertain in a way astronomers struggled to describe. Collector clusters no longer expanded. They no longer consumed. They drifted like thoughts that hadn't decided what sentence to become. And that was more unsettling than any invasion fleet. On Earth, life continued, but with a strange dual awareness. Normal problems still existed: economies, politics, weather disasters, scientific breakthroughs. But now every major institution also carried a quiet secondary question. What are the collectors becoming? No one had a solid answer, not even the L3. 3 months after their last meeting, they returned again. This time, they brought something unexpected. A recording. It was not a battle signal, not a command stream. It was a fragmented internal collector exchange, something never before observed. The projection filled the room. Not words exactly, but structured uncertainty patterns forming into language like meaning. Human linguists struggled for hours. Then finally, a translation stabilized. The message was simple, disturbingly simple. We do not know what we are without completion. Silence filled the chamber. A human scientist finally spoke softly. So they're scared of being unfinished. The L3 replied, they are defined by completion. You introduced continuation. That single sentence reframed everything. Humans had not defeated the collectors in any traditional sense. They had introduced a concept the collectors could not resolve, a system that never ends. A human diplomat leaned back. We didn't mean to do that. The L3 looked at them. That is what makes you dangerous. Not aggressive, not hostile, dangerous in the way fire is dangerous to a forest. It changes everything it touches. Across the galaxy, collector clusters began exhibiting new behavior. Some tried to reassemble into unified structure again, but every attempt collapsed under internal contradiction. Others began interacting with civilizations they encountered, not to consume, but to observe outcomes of change. In one recorded instance, a collector cluster encountered a small mining colony. Instead of assimilation, it asked a question. Why do you continue building after survival is guaranteed? The miners didn't even understand the question at first. Then one of them answered, because stopping feels like dying. That response caused a 0.6% structural instability spike in the collector cluster, which, in their new state, was considered significant. Back on Earth, analysts began noticing something else. Humanity was influencing more than just the collectors. Other young civilizations, ones still emerging across nearby systems, had begun accelerating cultural development patterns. Not through contact, through observation. Human broadcasts, human trade routes, human conflict resolution models. Even alien academia began adopting a strange phrase, the human instability principle. It described a species that progressed fastest when conditions were least stable. One council historian summarized it bluntly. All other civilizations build to eliminate chaos. Humans build through chaos. And that contradiction had now escaped Earth. The final shift came unexpectedly. A single collector cluster transmitted a message directly to Earth. Not translated. Not converted. Direct. Human engineers worked for days to interpret it. When they finally succeeded, the message was short. If we continue without completion, are we still us? No one answered immediately, because for the first time, humanity realized the collectors were no longer asking how to understand humans. They were asking how to understand themselves. And Earth had no instinctive answer for that. A young technician in the analysis room finally said quietly, "Welcome to being alive, I guess." No one corrected him. Outside the station window, distant stars burned steadily. And somewhere between them, an entire civilization was learning the most dangerous lesson in the universe. Not how to end, but how to continue without knowing why. The end. If you would like to see the next part, please kindly leave a comment saying part 2, and also consider liking the video. Like, subscribe, and comment if you enjoyed the story or tell me any mistakes I should fix.